welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. I'm Councillor Tom Bennett. I'm one of the Vice Chairman of the committee and I'm chairing this evening's meeting. To my right are my three councillor colleagues, and it's four of us who will be making the decisions this evening. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting at the end.
Councillor Mohammed Bakhtiar.
Councillor Hamish Durian.
And Councillor Lloyd North, proudly representing Camden Ward.
Thank you. And to my left are the officer team who will be presenting tonight's cases and advising us on them. And the officer team is led this evening by Martin Lomas to my immediate left. Right, we don't have any minutes to sign off. Apologies for absence. I've had apologies from Councillor Zvedeniuk, who's ill this evening, and Councillor Ali, who was originally on the order paper, has been replaced by Councillor Bakhtiar. So we're comfortably above a quorum, so no problems there. Declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest or other declarations? No? In which case, we proceed to the main orders of business. I'll just run through very quickly the cases we have in front of us this evening. So we'll start with number 4, Colbeck Mews, followed by Corbett House, followed by 10 Prince's Gate Mews, followed by 342 Westbourne Park Road, then 73 Holland Park, then 76 St Quentin Avenue, then 68 Holland Road, and finally 140 Lexham Gardens. We have speakers only for the first case, and thereafter there are no speakers present. In which case we proceed to our first case, which is number 4, Colbeck Mews.
Thank you, Chairman. This item relates to number 4, Colbeck Mews. This is a planning application and planning permission is sought for the excavation and construction of a basement beneath existing ground floor and the installation of a dormer window with skylights as part of an extension in the loft area. It is noted that the application originally referenced the construction of a lower ground floor as opposed to a basement. Officers felt this was misleading and the additional floor created would be entirely below ground. The development description was therefore updated and was advertised on this basis. So officers have therefore assessed the proposals as a basement in accordance with policy CD 11. Here we have the site location plan. Colbeck Mews is located between Courtfield Road and Harrington Gardens and lies within the Courtfield Conservation Area. Here we have an aerial view. 4 Colbeck Mews is a 3-storey Victorian private residential mews house. Colbeck Mews comprises 14 properties, all of which are used as residential accommodation. Here we have a couple of site photos. Properties feature carriage doors to the front elevation at ground floor level and have been replaced along the street to other properties or remodelled, and have had a number of properties along the mews have had their garage spaces removed and converted into habitable space. Here we can see an existing site plan, and here we can appreciate the extent of the existing front and rear elevations to the dwelling house. And here we have the proposed elevations that form part of the proposal. There would be no alterations to the front elevation of the property and therefore no impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area here. To the rear, a dormer extension, a dormer window is proposed, and a large replacement roof light is also proposed. The proposals here would not be publicly visible from any street-level view surrounding the host dwelling, whilst the proposals would be visible from some private views from the rear of the properties along Courtfield Road. These private views would not be significantly impacted. Here for members, I've put together the existing elevation on the left and the proposed elevation on the right. The dormer window would be timber framed and modestly sized and clad in lead. It would not exceed the height of the existing roof ridge. Though the proposed roof lights would be modestly increased in size, there would be no net increase in number of roof lights, and these would be conservation style and sit flush in the roof, as to be in keeping with the character and appearance of the area. The proposed alterations to the rear roof slope are considered by officers to be acceptable and would preserve the character and appearance of the existing building, group of terrace muse buildings and wider conservation area. The proposals would also be considered to safeguard the living conditions of neighbouring residents, and the dormer window would be fitted with obscure glazing, which would also be secured by condition. I've included here the existing floor plans. Here we have the ground floor, the first floor plan, and here we have the loft floor plan and the roof plan. And then just here for members, it says lower ground floor, but this would be the basement level to the left, the proposed ground floor plan and first floor plan to the right, and then the extent of the proposed loft space with the dormer window, allowing room for the new landing area. Here we can appreciate the existing sections of the dwelling house, and here we can see the proposed sections, which clearly show the extent of the basement beneath the existing ground floor level. This has been assessed against policy CD 11 and the basement's SPD, and is considered to be compliant. As such, it is recommended that planning permission be granted, subject to the recommended conditions as set out in the officer's report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to the public speaking part. So we're joined by one objector and one gentleman for the applicant. The way this works, if you haven't been to a meeting before, you have 3 minutes each, starting with the objector and then the applicant. And then the committee have a chance to ask you questions. And then when we finish that part of the meeting, we move on to questions to officers. And once we move on to questions to officers, we can't re-engage with you at that point. That's just the way the meeting's structured and the way the rules are. So as I say, 3 minutes each, starting with, is it Mr. Leven? Yeah, starting with Mr. Leven, and then 3 minutes for the applicant, and then we'll ask you questions. So please start whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak at this meeting. So I'm here to talk about 4 Colbeck Mews, and my name is Yves Leven, and I'm representing a leaseholder at 6870 Courtfield Gardens. So
Could you get closer to the mic, please, so we can hear you properly?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Is that better? Okay. So just briefly, my name is Yves Leven, and I'm representing a leaseholder at 6870 Courtfield Gardens. And the position of that leaseholder is to object, and I'll try to describe the reasons for that. I think in such a project, and it is a significant project because it has excavation issues, because it has construction issues. And if we look at 6870 Courtfield Gardens, it's part of a much larger building, which is residential. Unfortunately, this building was built in 1870s, and at that time, there were no foundations. And so that has implications when vibrations or excavation works are being done. So any excavation is going to have is going to affect the structure of the entire building. And because it doesn't have any foundations, the entire building is going to start moving and shifting. And because of the size, the huge size of this building, any movement is going to create cracks or even permanent damages. So I would just like to take this opportunity to state that this is no small job. I've been doing construction and refurbishing for 17 years, and I have some experience, whether it's in the UK or in France. And these issues, and I'm sure you will consider them fully. What I wanted to talk also about is the nature of the project that was presented to us. And it seems to me that there are issues that have not been brought up. I think the drawings are either incomplete or misleading. The foundations are not drawn the way they should be. There's no void if a solution using a void is retained. So I don't really understand how we can not anticipate such issues, because digging for this type of structure.
Sorry, Mr. Leven, we've hit 3 minutes. If you could just summarize quickly, I'll just give you 10 more seconds to summarize.
Well, I just want to point the effect of not taking consideration of all these risk factors to other buildings around it, which are just meters away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are we joined by Mr. Lilly for the applicant? Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Lilly, I'll give you up to 3.5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Anthony Lilly of 0.1 Limited, the agent for 4 Colbeck Mews. We work regularly in the borough and have recently guided several basement and conservation area schemes through delegated approval, so we understand both the council's and the residents' expectations. The proposal is for a single-storey basement, wholly beneath the house, and a modest rear dormer with a replacement and reconfiguration of the 3 roof lights. The purpose is to create a safer, better-lit, policy-compliant family home that supports long-term multi-generational living without changing the Mews frontage. I speak this evening for the applicant at 4 Colbeck Mews on why the changes are required. First is the dormer, which is proposed for 2 reasons. Firstly, the existing loft doesn't meet nationally prescribed space standards, and so the proposed new dormer allows for a fully compliant principal bedroom with a small ensuite, keeping the family in the borough and avoiding any outward expansion. Secondly, the dormer and the reconfiguration of the roof lights will boost daylight, provide full head height for safer circulation, and make room for a building regs compliant staircase to replace the current narrow and steep staircases, thereby improving safety for older children and relatives. Some larger examples exist at number 5, 6 and 9 Colbeck Mews, and officers confirm it preserves the character and appearance of the Courtfield Conservation Area, so no harm arises. Regarding the basement, the proposal and the additional conditions which have been agreed by the applicant render it fully compliant with policies. It's only 1 storey, wholly under the footprint. Structural method statements and flood risk drainage reports have been provided to the council and reviewed. Condition 3 secures a chartered structural engineer throughout the works, including detailed design, which I think needs to be mentioned. Condition 7 requires a positive pump device before occupation to negate the risk of flooding, and a blue roof is included for SUDS compliance and environmental benefit. Conditions 4 and 6 lock in the construction code of practice and the construction traffic management plan to control noise, dust, vibration, routing and hours of work. Neighbour amenities respected. There are no external light wells or terraces, no additional railings proposed. The dormer is obscure glaze and sits over the stair void. Chair, this is a considerate, modest scheme that improves housing quality, daylight and safety while safeguarding neighbours in the conservation area. I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you very much. So we now move to questions. Colleagues, who would like to start? Councillor Bakhtia.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lilly, you've heard the objector, and the major concern here is vibration and the movement of the building during excavation, which is part of the process. How are you going to mitigate this? Could you explain for the neighboring buildings? How are you going to make sure? And what are their rights? Explain their rights for if any damage done to their buildings or their flats. Thank you.
Yes, there'll be further consultation on the formal construction traffic management plan, so we'll make sure flat number 68 of the property behind is included in the consultation. This is one of the conditions that's been agreed. Also, there's the party wall mechanism, which if any foundations are affected, the adjoining owners will have their rights, which account of any situation in terms of structure. Noise, dust and vibration mitigation, that's part of the plan submitted, again with a considerate contractor. So there are measures in place that the council regularly uses for these kind of basement projects. And of course in a Muse, the applicant is very keen to make sure we get further engagement with the residents to avoid anything and bring them into a full understanding of how the process is going to unfold should permission be granted.
Colleagues, yes, Councillor North.
Thank you, Chairman. I have one question each for the objector and the applicant for the agent. To the objector, first of all, I take your point, and it's quite understandable for any neighbour to make the comments you made tonight. I'm just looking at the report at the moment, and I just ask you if you're reassured that there is a structural methodology document that supports this application, and there are conditions attached to this. And the answer that's just been given to my colleague, does that reassure you in some way towards your concerns?
I'm sorry, but unless I see a drilling sample, I can't forecast any result of this excavation process.
Sorry, what sample?
A drilling sample.
A drilling sample, okay. Do you want to pick that?
Okay, if I can ask that question then to the applicant, and then I have a follow-up question.
The chartered structural engineer who's prepared this report has done many basements in Kensington, Chelsea, following the process, which requires a detailed geotechnical survey to be done. 4 trial pits with dug and samples taken, analysed. A ground movement assessment is then undertaken to inform the design of the basement.
Okay, maybe we'll follow this point up with officers in a moment.
If I could just add one
Yep,
more question. Just following up from the various concerns, I noticed that there is obviously a code of conduct, construction code of conduct practice in place, and a condition 4 of this about the you are obviously aware from negotiations with your neighbours about this, and can you offer that reassurance that you do recognise condition 4 and the code of conduct practice?
Absolutely, that's correct. The applicant has formally agreed to the conditions sent through by the council recently. All of those 7 conditions, which are precisely for reasons of the neighbours. And the applicant has confirmed that he'll reach out further to all the neighbours because they want to move into this property and work with everyone there.
Thank you. I had a question, Ms Lilly, about that was raised in the papers by an objector about overlooking, and the officer's report says that will largely be mitigated or prevented via frosted glazing. Could you just tell us a bit more about that, about the windows that the objectors have concerns about overlooking, and if the frosted glazing will be sufficient? Can those windows be sort of swung open, for example, thereby making it easier to look out of them?
So there's going to be a fixed window in that position with obscured glazing. It looks straight onto a different level, as the adjoining owner said. Their property is a much bigger building. This is a Muse building, so the flat in question overlooks the applicant's flat, so it doesn't actually look into, if it could look through an opaque window, it looks against the flank wall. Also, that window is in top of the stair void, so the only way anyone would be able to look out of that window if it was broken or unopaque, they would have to be standing on the very last step looking that way. So it's not in a habitable space, as shall we say.
Thank you, that's helpful. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Bakhtiar. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Levin, I would like to ask you this question to give you an opportunity to express. If the committee is willing to approve this application, what conditions would you like to see? Are you satisfied with the answers given by the applicant and the agent? What conditions would you like to see to make sure your building or your flat is not damaged during this process?
Thank you for your question. That's one answer would be that drilling samples, if you take one drilling sample 10 meters away from another one, you're going to get a complete different result. So the experience of the person who's doing the general contractor work in areas that are 100 or 200 meters away is, in my opinion, totally irrelevant, because the soil at any specific area is completely different. And so without any drilling and several drillings, you can't make a judgment on what the rock structure is going to be like. To further answer your question, it's not even a matter of taking a large insurance to cover any risks, because once there are cracks or structural damages, it cannot be repaired. So anything that we look at on some cases where drought has created structural damage to buildings, they cannot be repaired. There are lots of different techniques that can help, but they will not bring it back to its previous state. So I understand this project, but with such a project comes a responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's probably something we can take up further with officers. Next question, next section. Happy for me to move to the next section? Fantastic. So we now move to questions to officers. And I suppose the key one is the point on the methodology for ensuring the structural soundness of the neighbouring properties, and particularly the properties on Courtfield Gardens, which are tall properties, and we've heard from 1870s with, let's say, much less significant foundations than they'll be built with today. How can we ensure through conditions that those properties are properly protected?
Thank you, Chairman. I think officers are satisfied that sufficient standard conditions have been carefully appended in this case. And obviously, as mentioned, the pre-commencement conditions have been agreed by the agent. So officers have included condition 3, which requires the agent to ensure that a qualified structural engineer is appointed prior to the commencement of development to oversee the construction phase. And officers have also applied a code of construction practice condition, which is quite a standard condition for a proposal of this nature. And as expressed, also the standard conditions 5 and 6 have been appended. So we would work closely with the agent through the discharge conditions phase to ensure that we're satisfied with the details submitted at that point.
Now, I'm certainly no expert in these matters, but I know on some cases in the past we have conditioned sort of additional samples to be taken. Is there any case here for, you've heard the conversation in front of us, for informing, we wouldn't want to put it in too much detail as a committee because it's not our expertise, but perhaps, additional samples to be taken, more than the standard conditions?
Thank you. I don't believe so in this case. Officers have consulted internally, and the conditions are based on recommendations from other officers in different departments, such as environmental health, etc. So in this case, they are the standard conditions that have been applied.
Perhaps further, it would be beneficial for whoever's, whether it's the structural engineer or whoever's doing the sampling, sort of the testing for the applicant, to consult with the objectors and particularly with Mr. Levin before those samples are taken, just so that he can fully understand the context and ensure that the proper sort of samples or whatever are taken. Would that be a condition we could either add that as a condition or expand potentially condition 3 to include that.
Chairman, if I may, in this particular case, the application is supported by a very detailed construction method statement, as we expect. They have carried out site-specific borehole testing, trial pits to look at the existing foundations. Excuse me. There's a desktop study, a ground investigation study, structural calculations, and a very detailed method statement in terms of the construction, including an assessment of impact on adjacent properties, all as we expect on all basement applications. And nothing within that document suggests that there's anything particular about this site, and that basically means we should be asking them to carry out additional site investigations. They've done the work. It's signed off by a structural engineer, and I don't see site-specific circumstance here to go above and beyond. We already have a very detailed construction method statement that's met all the requirements of our SPD.
And then just on the point Mr. Levin raised, I don't want to get too into the weeds because, as I say, it's not our area of expertise, but around some of the samples potentially being taken not that close to the site itself, and how the sort of soil, etc., can differ over 20, 30, 40 metres, etc. Is there anything in that statement which says where those samples were taken, and are we happy that they were sort of on the immediate site?
Yes, there's a plan that shows where the borehole sampling and the trial pits were dug, which were on the site.
Colleagues, anyone want to follow up on that? I think, it's a very important consideration, but we can't go too deep into construction method statements because, that's just not our expertise as a committee. I think we've perhaps pushed this as far as we can go. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, Councillor Bhatia.
The main thing is to take the objectives consideration on board, if we could, as much as we can.
Yeah, perhaps we could just add that as an informative. The points the objector made around what sort of summary of his comments, but around the vulnerability of that building on Courtfield Gardens and the importance to drill sort of samples locally. If we add that as an informative and perhaps suggest that he's contacted as a follow-up as well, and then it's there as an informative, and hopefully the applicant will follow that. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bhatia. Colleagues, should we proceed to a vote? In which case we've added one informative, but we haven't changed any of the conditions in the pack. The recommendation is to grant. I'll just do a show of hands. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous. So planning permission is granted, and thank you both for coming to join us to speak on that case. We now proceed to Corbett House.
Thank you, Chairman. This item relates to Corbett House. Members will see the plans within their committee packs. Here, planning permission is sought for the replacement of existing windows with like-for-like timber sash windows and replacement of a flat roof element. This is brought to planning committee today as the applicant is RBKC. The proposed replacement of the windows and flat roof to Corbett House are considered to be appropriate within the conservation area. The proposal is like-for-like replacement of existing windows and the flat roof structure. The replacement windows would be fitted into the existing openings with no discernible change to the external appearance of the property. The proposals have been considered by officers to preserve the character and appearance and significance of the building and the wider Bolton's conservation area. They would ensure good living conditions continue for the occupants of the building and neighbouring occupants in compliance with the relevant policies in the local plan. As such, it is recommended that planning permission is granted subject to the recommended conditions set out in the officers' reports. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And we have no speakers in this case. Colleagues, any questions for officers? No, fairly straightforward one. Yeah, okay. In which case, we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous. Planning permission is granted. We now proceed to number 10, Prince's Gate Mews.
Thank you so much, Chairman. This item relates to 10 Prince's Gate Mews. Here, planning permission is sought for the removal of a mansard roof with roof lights to the rear elevation and replacement with raised parapet wall and flat roof in line with neighbouring properties. It's also for the insertion of 3 double-glazed timber-framed windows to the rear elevation at second floor level, along with other alterations as set out in the development description. It should be noted that no basement is proposed here. The basement that's mentioned by objectors has been substantially completed and formed part of a previous certificate approved in 2015, confirming that planning permission at the time was not required for the basement. But it is shown on the plans for full sort of consistency. 10 Prince's Gate Mews is a mid-terrace mews house over 2 stories plus mansard roof level and, as stated, has a substantially excavated basement level. The property is on the south side of the southernmost arm of the 3 mews branches and backs onto the V&A Museum. The property is in the Queensgate Conservation Area. Here I've shown on the slide the existing front elevation to the left and the proposed front elevation to the right. And here, for comparative purposes, the existing elevation on the left and the proposed elevation to the right. The development to increase the height of the rear parapet would bring in line this parapet with the neighbouring houses. New windows to the rear would be discreetly located with minimal impact on the character and appearance of the dwelling and surrounding area. Condition 6 has been recommended for obscure glazing in order to prevent overlooking into the adjacent museum complex. The additional bulk of the development would not be any higher than the highest point of the neighbouring properties, and we would be restricted by the footprint of the building. There would be no harmful loss of light or sense of enclosure as a result of the alterations to the parapet element. The changes to the front elevation are generally like-for-like refurbishments and would have no material impact on the character and appearance of the dwelling and the surrounding area. Overall, the proposals have been considered by officers to preserve the character and appearance of the group of buildings in the Queensgate Conservation Area and have ensured good living conditions would continue for neighbouring properties. It is for this reason that it's recommended for approval subject to the recommended conditions set out in the officer's report for members. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions? No, I just had one on the V&As, because I think most of the objections were around the basement, but there's a clarification that that's already been granted and this application is not for a basement is helpful. But on the V&A's security objections, could you just tell us a little bit more about what their concerns are and why we, why officers don't think that they are a significant issue?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the objection letter from the V&A generally raised a concern around security, or a security risk to the museum as a result of the proposed windows. And they had a couple of requests in relation to some details to the windows. Officers carefully reviewed the objection and have considered that the windows at this higher level are not large enough to be considered a security risk by way of anybody being able to climb out of them. Officers have concluded that the risk is low and also have assessed proposals against policy D11 of the London Plan, which relates to safety, security and resilience to an emergency, and also in the adopted local plan policy CD2, part B8, which is relates to kind of secure design and designing out crime. Officers have assessed proposals against that part of the policy as well. So, yeah, officers concluded that, you know, there is quite a substantial gap between the rear facade and the border of the V&A boundary jurisdiction, and therefore the risk officers consider would be low.
Okay, thank you. No, good to hear it's been thoroughly considered. Colleagues, any other questions before we proceed to a vote? No? Okay, in which case we do proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous. Planning permission is granted. We now move on to 342 Westbourne Park Road.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd firstly like to draw members' attention to the addendum report. This includes a revision to the description of the development following the admission of the previously proposed raised ground floor, infill and extension to the rear outrigger. The revised plans have admitted these elements and the assessment has been made based on these revisions. Planning permission is therefore now only sought for the proposed lower ground floor rear extension and the changes to the rear windows. The existing and proposed block plan can be seen on this slide. The proposed lower ground floor rear extension can be seen in this location if I use my cursor here. The extension would project 3.3 metres past the existing rear outrigger and would provide an enlarged kitchen/dining room associated with the existing residential property. The extension has been designed to be full width with a flat roof and a single roof light. The extension would be constructed of brick with aluminium framed doors on the rear elevation. Recommended condition 3 ensures that the new extension would match the existing materials. The new windows on the rear elevation, which can be seen in the drawings within your pack, would be replaced with timber sash windows. Again, recommended condition 7 ensures that these new windows are timber framed, white painted and sliding sashes. To conclude, the officer recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the recommended conditions set out in section 8 of the officer's report. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just start quickly because I noticed with a lot of the objections initially focused around the upper ground floor element, which was then withdrawn from the application. And I just wonder whether any objectors then withdrew their objections or were offered the opportunity to.
Thank you, Chairman. You're correct. So a lot of the objections were relating to the upper ground floor infill extension and the extension to the rear outrigger. I don't believe that any of those objections were formally withdrawn, and I'm not aware that the case officer directly contacted them to withdraw their objections.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, yes, Councillor Bakhtia.
Reading from the objectors, two concerns. Sophia Lambert is very, very precise. She doesn't think that this is not keeping with the conservation area, but she is worried about the light pollution coming from the large areas of the plate glass and from the skylights of the extension. What do you say about this?
Thank you, Councillor. So light pollution is a consideration, and I believe it's covered by policy GB10 of the local plan. Officers are satisfied that the proposed openings at the lower ground floor level and the single roof light wouldn't lead to such a significant impact in relation to light pollution. So officers are satisfied that the impact would be acceptable.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any further questions on this case? No. Okay, in which case we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant planning permission. Can I see all those in favour? All those against? So that's 1 against, 3 in favour. So planning permission is granted. We now move to number 73 Holland Park.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I'd like to draw members' attention to the addendum report and the recommended additional condition for the planning permission. The applications before members this evening seek planning permission and listed building consent for the construction of a single-storey basement and associated outbuilding. My presentation considers both the planning permission and the listed building consent together. However, members will need to consider the applications separately and form a decision on both applications. The application building is Grade 2 listed and within the Holland Park Conservation Area. The existing and the proposed garden plan can be seen on this slide. The proposed garden plan shows the new outbuilding, which is circled in red just here. The proposed structure would be a garden building with a spiral stair to access the proposed basement. The garden building has been positioned towards the rear, but away from the rear and the side boundary walls. Therefore, the garden outbuilding reads as a separate building rather than as part of the main house. This ensures that the proposal preserves the setting of the listed building as set out within the officer's report. The proposed outbuilding would be located 3 metres from the rear boundary, which I'll just draw attention with my cursor here. And I'd also like to draw members' attention to the proposed soft landscaping shown on this plan. There is a proposed new hedge in this location, which I'll also show you within the next slide. This slide shows the existing and proposed section plan. I draw members' attention to the proposed basement, which would be sited below part of the existing rear garden. The proposed basement would be single-storey and would not exceed more than 50% of this existing open area. As members can see in this section and within the plans within your pack, the depth of the basement varies and there is an additional allowance for the proposed swimming pool. Officers are satisfied that the proposal is single-storey for the purpose of policy CD11 of the local plan. I would again draw members' attention to the landscaping proposed, which would mitigate some views of the outbuilding from Holland Park Avenue, which is located to the north. Members can see the hedge located in this location and the rear boundary treatment on Holland Park Avenue in this location here. This existing rear boundary is marked by a brick wall and bottle balustrade. This would be retained and upgraded as part of the works. The outbuilding would project above this wall by approximately 2 metres. However, given that it would be set back from the rear boundary, officers are satisfied that the outbuilding would continue to preserve the overall character and the setting of the Grade 2 listed building. To conclude, the officer recommendation is to grant planning permission and to grant the associated listed building consent, subject to the recommended conditions set out in Section 8 of the officer's reports. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the first question on the bottle balustrades. Now, one thing sometimes people do which really annoys me is they replace bottle balustrades that have gaps in between the bottles with ones which have sort of an opaque sort of wall in between the bottles. And in theory, it gives the same effect, though of course it doesn't at all. Because one of the nice things about bottle balustrades is that you can sort of see through them and see the architecture. So I was just wondering, these bottle balustrades, will they be sort of infilled between, and can we just stipulate that they're not?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't believe they've got kind of a wall or anything behind them, and you would be able to see through them. I know that the proposed street scene elevation has been reviewed by our listed building colleagues as well, and they're satisfied with it. The recommended condition on the listed building consent, which is condition 3, does require some submission of some further details as well. which includes details of the materiality of the walls to the garden. That doesn't specifically outline the bottle balustrade, but if members considered it necessary, you could look to include it within that condition 3.
If colleagues agree with that sentiment, yeah, it could either, I mean, whether it's a condition or just minute that we would expect that to be included, that sort of gap in between each of the bottles to be included within the plans. I'm happy to do it either way, whichever way you think is best.
So I think currently on the plans, from my understanding, it is clear that the bottle balustrades would be open and would allow for views through. I know at the moment there's quite a variation of the rear elevations along Holland Park Avenue. I think currently there's a hoarding up, but that would be removed as part of these works as well. So I think if you wanted further information beyond what's provided, then you'd need to secure it as part of condition 3. If you're happy for an informative or it to be included as part of the minutes, that members are pleased that the bottle balustrades kind of reflect the historic form, then we can also do that. So I think it just depends if you want to include it as part of the condition to further safeguard.
Well, there's no harm to putting it in the condition. Yeah, we'll just put it in the condition, please. Thank you. Colleagues, other questions? Yes, Councillor North.
Thank you. I think I'm reassured by this, but I'm just looking at the tree and I see the arboricultural report that there's no harm to the copper tree for the neighbours at 74. And I know they're quite concerned about this. Can we be reassured, Belt and Braces, that there's no damage to the root systems and they're quite 100% happy with that? It seems to see that from the report.
Thank you, Councillor. You're correct. So a tree report was submitted and was reviewed by officers, including in consultation with our tree officers. We're satisfied that there's not going to be any long-term threat or impact to any trees on the application site or nearby. Recommended condition 4 on the planning permission does also further safeguard those trees as well.
I just had another question about the hedge in front of the outbuilding. So I think it's good that they're planting a hedge there, because obviously that's a slightly more modern building in what's a much more traditional context, but obviously hedges can die. What if the hedge wasn't there, what would it look like? What's the flank of that building?
So if the hedge wasn't there, the view would be of the outbuilding. The outbuilding would be constructed of clad or timber-clad material, so it would be around 2 metres that would project above the wall. Officers are satisfied, as I say, that the outbuilding would read as an ancillary garden structure, and therefore even if views or glimpse views were achieved, it wouldn't be harmful, including to the setting of those listed buildings. Okay,
yeah, I mean, it's... I suppose as long as it's timber, even though it's a modern design, it's probably doesn't detract much. Colleagues, any other thoughts on that or questions? No. Could you just confirm quickly the depth of the basement? Just double check that.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chairman. If I draw members' attention to the plans within their pack, let me just sketch them myself. So if you're looking at the drawing, which is proposed garden section AA, where the swimming pool is located, that would have a floor to ceiling height of 4.5 metres, and the room that's been identified as the ice bath would have a floor to ceiling height of 3.8 metres. Looking at the later section drawing, which I can put on the screen as well if that's helpful. Which is here. So looking at the proposed section, which is proposed garden section BB in your pack, the depth of the basement in this area is 2.6 metres. The depth of the basement taken from ground level here down to the bottom here is 4.7 metres, and that does allow for the access into the basement from that spiral staircase. And then the depth of the basement from this location here would be 3.8 metres. So as set out within the officer's report, we are satisfied that the basement would be single-storey, even with that additional allowance for the swimming pool.
Colleagues, any further questions on this? No. I mean, it is an important application because these are listed buildings, very beautiful buildings, which we need to protect. Just a couple of things I'd say quickly before we proceed to a vote. Firstly, it's gone back and forth a number of times, and they've had, and I think what we've got now is a significant improvement over the previous ones, which probably did either harm directly the listed building or the setting of the listed building. And that's why we've got this slightly unusual design now where the access isn't from the building itself, but from an outbuilding in the garden. So that's, there's been, not just window dressing, I think really significant improvements of this application. And the second point is, whilst this is a large basement, our policies are generally the relevant points on basements, so you've got to view it in the context of the sort of size of the garden where it's being built, and this is a very large garden, and so therefore allows for a larger basement. And in terms of depths, percentages, etc., I think we have to conclude it is policy compliant purely from a basement point of view. Anyway, those are the only 2 points I'd make. Right, we now proceed to a vote. The recommendation, we amended a condition, didn't we? Yeah, on the bottle balustrades.
So
yeah.
that's condition 3 of the listed building consent.
Right, okay. So we'll vote first on the planning application and then on the listed building consent. So on the planning application, the recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous. Planning permission is granted. And then on the listed building consent with that amendment to condition 3, the recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So again, unanimously granted on the listed building consent. Right, we now move on to, I assume everyone's happy just to go through to the end, yeah. To number 76 St Quintin Avenue.
Thank you, Chairman. This application relates to a semi-detached building known as 76 St Quintin Avenue. The building is located within the Oxford Gardens Conservation Area. Planning permission is sought for the construction of a single-storey rear extension and a 2-storey side return extension. The proposed single-storey extension would replace an existing conservatory. The existing and proposed rear elevation can be seen on this slide. The proposed rear extension, as I mentioned, would replace an existing rear conservatory, but the new extension would be full width, but it would match the existing depth of that conservatory. So the proposed extension would project 4.5 metres from the original rear elevation. In terms of height, the proposed rear extension, whilst it would be single-storey, it would have a maximum height of 3.3 metres. The existing height of the existing conservatory is 2.8 metres, so there's an additional 0.5 metres proposed as part of the rear extension. I would just draw members' attention to the garage, which can be seen in, if I circle my cursor here. The garage side wall and front wall would be amended as part of this application, but the overall height and the form of the garage would remain as existing, so there'd be no additional height to the garage, just additional height to the proposed rear extension. And then lastly, I would draw members' attention on elevation form to this element here, which is the 2-storey side return. To conclude, the officer recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the recommended conditions set out in section 8 of the officer's report. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions on that one? Yes, Councillor Bakhtia.
I know we are dealing with the case in front of us, but one of the objectors saying that they might be worried about the future impact if they applied to use the flat roof as a balcony.
Thank you, Councillor. So that has been considered as part of the officer's report, and we have got recommended condition 4, which precludes the use of the roof as a terrace. So that would further safeguard it in terms of living conditions and ensure that it couldn't be used as a terrace without applying to the local planning authority first.
Thank you very much.
I just had a question about the garage alterations, because the garage is obviously very close to the neighbouring property, and I think you said there's no increase in height, but in terms of sort of increase in shape or any of the other dimensions, just I know objectors sort of are concerned about that affecting light, particularly into the communal garden, but maybe also into one of the flats. Are you confident that there will be no sort of meaningful impact on daylight from the change of shape of the garage? And also just tell us a little bit more about how the garage is changing, please.
Of course, thank you, Chairman. So the existing garage provides 2 spaces. The proposal would replace one of the side elevation walls, which fronts onto or will connect to the proposed extension. It would also replace the existing openings on the front. So those 2 walls would be altered as part of this scheme. However, the remaining walls and the roof and the flat roof would remain as existing. So I don't believe there'd be any changes. So officers are satisfied that because the overall scale, form, massing of the garage would remain as existing, there wouldn't be any increase or any impact in terms of living conditions for the loss of light.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions? No? Okay. In which case, we'll proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Please can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimously granted. And we now move on to number 68 Holland Road.
Thank you, Chairman. That's great. So this application relates to 68 Holland Road. The reason it's being presented to members this evening is that it is a council-owned building and RBKC are the applicant. The proposal seeks to replace the existing timber windows with a like-for-like replacement with double glazed. The property is located within the Holland Park Conservation Area, and I would just draw members' attention to the recommended conditions, specifically condition 3, which requires the windows to be timber framed, white painted, and sashes. Officers recommend that planning permission is granted, subject to the recommended conditions. That concludes my presentation, but again, happy to answer any questions.
Colleagues, any questions on that one? No? Pretty straightforward. In which case we proceed to a vote. Recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So it's unanimous. Planning permission is granted. We now move on to the final case, number 140 Lexham Gardens.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, this application is being presented to members this evening as RBKC are the applicant. The planning application seeks planning permission for the replacement of the existing timber single glazed windows with a like-for-like replacement, including double glazed. The building is located within the Lexham Gardens Conservation Area, and again, similar to the previous application, recommended condition 3 ensures that the new timber windows are timber framed, white painted, and sliding sashes. Officers recommend that planning permission is granted, subject to the recommended conditions set out within the officer's report. Again, happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? No. In which case, we move to a vote. Recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? And that is unanimous. Planning permission is granted. And that brings an end to tonight's proceedings. Thank you all very much.